Today we're looking at the Fall of Richmond. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. So as Ulysses S Grant's overland campaign or wilderness campaign drew to an end, he had not defeated Robert E. Lee's Confederate army, but had heavily weakened them and had pushed them closer and closer to the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. Now, instead of destroying Lee's army, Grant turned his focus to cutting supplies off to Richmond by attacking Petersburg, which was a little over 20 miles south of Richmond. Petersburg had 5 railroad lines that met there, so taking it would basically open the doors to capturing the Confederate capital. In mid-June of 1864, the Union Army attempted to attack the city directly, but Confederate defenders there under the command of P.G.T. Beauregard were able to fend off the attacks. This gave Robert E. Lee time to reinforce Beauregard's defenses, and now Grant knew he was going to have to set in for a long campaign to capture the city. For 292 days, from June 15, 1864 to April 2, 1865, the Union Army continued attacking the city. The Confederates had built extensive trenches, and the Union dug in as well. The fight very much resembled what we would see during World War I in Europe. However, it was not a siege in a traditional sense because the Union did not surround the city. Instead, the Confederates remained committed to defending the city, and Grant's army remained committed to capturing it. The Union mounted several offensives attempting to break through the Confederate defenses. Probably one of the most unique and tragic engagements to take place was the Battle of the Crater on July 30th of 1864. For weeks, Union troops dug a tunnel underneath the Confederate lines and packed it full of thousands of pounds of explosives. Early in the morning on July 30th, they detonated the mine, instantly killing 250 Confederates and creating a massive crater. Union troops charged into the gap in the Confederate line, but got caught in the giant crater themselves. The battle deteriorated into total confusion on both sides, and in the end, the Confederates were able to hold off the Union troops, and the Union suffered close to 4,000 casualties, while the Confederates suffered close to 2,000 casualties. As the months wore on, Grant began to focus more and more of his resources on attacking the western or southwestern side of Petersburg, targeting the Confederates' main supply lines. Several battles occurred as the Confederates desperately tried to keep their supply lines maintained and keep the Union out of Petersburg. On April 1st, 1862, Grant was victorious at the Battle of Five Forks, setting the stage for the final assault. On April 2nd, 1865, sometimes called the Breakthrough, when Union troops were able to break through the Confederate defenses. Robert E. Lee sent a message back to Confederate President Jefferson Davis that evening saying he could no longer hold that position at Petersburg and that Richmond must be evacuated. That evening, the entire Confederate government fled from the city, but before leaving, setting fire to get basically as many government documents as they could and as many crucial buildings as they could. Lee, along with some 50,000 Confederate troops, retreated west of Petersburg, and Lee had hopes of joining Confederate General Joseph Johnston in North Carolina. In the meantime, Union troops marched towards Richmond, and on April 3rd, 1865, the Confederate capital fell to the advancing Union troops. Grant's troops entered a smoldering city with fires still raging and smoldering papers flying through the air. Grant set up his new military headquarters in the former Confederate White House and raised a Union flag over the Confederate Capitol building. Amazingly, the next day, on April 4th, 1865, barely 48 hours after the Confederates had fled, President Lincoln and his son Tad came to Richmond by boat to meet with Grant. The streets were flooded with former enslaved people wanting to shake Lincoln's hand. And amazingly, this was before the Secret Service, there was only a handful of sailors with the president to protect him and guide him through the streets. Lincoln had hoped to meet with Grant, but instead there were a group of Southerners at Jefferson Davis's former house that wanted to meet with Lincoln and discuss how to bring the war to an end. After this meeting, Lincoln and Tad toured the city in a carriage. Now all of the elements of the original Anaconda Plan that was proposed by the Union to win the war had been accomplished. They had set up the full blockade of southern ports. The Mississippi River was now under Union control after Grant's victory at Vicksburg, and now Richmond had fallen, with again Grant leading the campaign. The Confederacy was on their last breath, and within days the Confederates would surrender and the war would be over. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.